Emily finally finished washing the last dish from a towering stack of dirty plates and sighed a long sigh of relief. She wiped her sweaty forehead with the sleeve of her robe, feeling the fatigue of the day's labor. For the past 2 months, she worked at the upscale restaurant, the King's Crown, where the work was relentless and never-ending. Her responsibilities were extensive. She cleaned the kitchen, took out the garbage, and washed all the dishes. She also had to sweep the restaurant's patio every morning, as the janitor only took care of the main entrance. Despite her hard work and numerous duties, Emily earned only a modest salary, just enough to support her 2 children and cover her rent. When she returned home each evening, she was utterly exhausted, too tired to cook or help her kids with their homework. Yet, she had no choice but to push through each day, driven by the necessity of her circumstances. Emily's challenging situation stemmed from being a single mother. Growing up in an orphanage, Emily always dreamed of having a big, loving family. After graduating, she was fortunate to meet her soulmate, Jack, a kind and caring man. They married and were blessed with twin boys, Ethan and Harper, who became the jewels of their lives. Jack worked tirelessly as a taxi driver, striving to provide for his family despite the lack of support from his parents, who were struggling with alcoholism. Despite the many obstacles, the young family did their best to make ends meet with Jack's income from driving cabs. Because they couldn't afford childcare, Emily stayed home with the children, leaving Jack to bear the financial burden alone. He went to great lengths to maximize his earnings, working night shifts and even bending the rules by taking on illegal fares, desperate to provide for his beloved family. The percentage of income from driving a taxi was small. Unfortunately, one day, Jack fell asleep at the wheel from exhaustion and got into a fatal accident. The death of her husband was a devastating blow for Emily. She was left alone to raise her 2 young children, starting first grade, without help or support. Overcoming her shyness and fear of leaving her sons alone, Emily began to earn money slowly through low-paying jobs. At first, she went door to door twice a day, distributing flyers and complimentary newspapers into mailboxes. She also put up ads on unique stands near public transportation stops. Although the pay was minimal, these jobs helped Emily and her family survive. 3 years have passed since her husband's death. Emily still thinks of Jack every day and misses him greatly. However, her 2 beautiful sons helped her to keep going and not give up. Getting a job at the restaurant was a stroke of luck for Emily. Although the pay was still low, it was much more than she had been earning by posting ads. This was crucial for her then, as she had grown accustomed to the difficulties of making ends meet. Working as a dishwasher didn't seem so bad to her. The only thing that constantly worried Emily was how her sons, Ethan and Harper, were treated at school. They were often bullied and made fun of because of their family's poverty and modest possessions. Emily's children dressed in practical trousers, sweaters, and cheap cotton shirts as simply as possible. If something got torn, she would try to fix it instead of buying new clothes. The only thing Emily couldn't control was time, as her children inevitably grew and needed new clothes and shoes that fit them. Unfortunately, Emily herself couldn't afford to buy even the most straightforward new blouse and had to make do with worn-out clothes that were close to falling apart. "Your last name should have been Brochi, not Richie," Ethan and Harper were teased by their wealthier classmates. The children didn't understand that their family was forced to live modestly against their will. "Look at them. They can't even afford a donut," their classmates laughed at the brothers in the school cafeteria. "Get out of here, you bastards. How do we know you're not stealing from others while standing in line? You're not getting anything anyway. Get out of here." It was excruciating for Emily to hear such accusations against her children, but the school administration was indifferent. "We don't know why the other kids are behaving like that. Maybe your children did something to provoke them," they said dismissively. Emily often wished she could enroll her twin sons in a faraway school where they wouldn't be bullied because of their complex and modest circumstances. However, she knew she didn't have the means to do so. Even though the school the boys attended was close to their home, Emily still held on to the hope that one day, they would break free from the daily struggles they faced. In the meantime, she did her best to comfort and support her boys. One day, while cleaning the restaurant, Emily noticed several plates of leftover food in a corner of the kitchen next to the garbage can. Upon closer inspection, she realized these were not just scraps of cold food. Many dishes were still untouched. Customers had paid for them and then, for some reason, left them uneaten. Now, they were about to be thrown away. Among the leftovers were cold appetizers, cheese plates, side dishes, pasta, soup, and even broccoli mashed potatoes. As Emily looked at the edible treasure, her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since the previous night and had given her children the last bit of porridge for dinner. With an undisguised appetite, she looked at the plates of food. After a moment of thought, she quickly removed a couple of empty plastic containers from the refrigerator and transferred the leftover food into them. Today, my children will not go hungry or have to eat thick porridge with water again, she thought. Today, they will eat until they're full. That evening, the Ritchie twins tasted cheese and natural meat sausage. They devoured the containers of treats their mother had brought for them with incredible speed. On the other hand, Emily wept with happiness, seeing the healthy color and flush slowly appearing on her children's pale and thin faces. She could only swallow a few spoonfuls of vegetable puree as she was overwhelmed with emotions. From then on, Emily discreetly removed any uneaten food from the restaurant every evening. It became her secret way of ensuring her children had nutritious meals. This quiet defiance against their harsh reality renewed Emily's hope and determination. She knew that as long as she had strength, she would continue to fight for a better future for her boys, no matter the odds. The dishes the restaurant guests had barely touched were a lifeline for Emily. She carefully selected only what the guests had refused to eat, never taking anything prepared for future service. She knew the customers who left their food behind wouldn't ask for it again. The prominent patrons of the King's Crown were usually very wealthy people for whom the cost of a refused dish was insignificant. They could spend hundreds of dollars in one evening at the restaurant without considering it a significant expense. One day, Emily took in a stray dog she found near her house. Max was a handsome and obedient dog with shaggy ears that twitched constantly as if trying to catch all the sounds around him. His black eyes shone with defiance whenever he saw Emily or her twins. Initially, Emily fed the poor animal on the street, but her children eventually convinced her to take him home, mainly because she had grown attached to him. Chef Mike and the restaurant servers often laughed at Emily. They didn't know she had children and thought she was taking the food home for her dog. God, she's like a skeleton herself, Mike would sometimes joke. It would be better if Emily ate something instead of giving everything to her dog. For several months, everything went well until the King's Crown changed ownership. A man named Stephen Brooks became the new owner of the restaurant. He was young and ambitious, with an obsessive desire to control everything and everyone. As a businessman, he feared his employees would constantly rob his restaurant. That's why he moved from the big city to the province, trying to prevent theft before it could happen. Mr. Brooks installed several video cameras throughout the establishment and personally monitored the employees when he could. One evening, while staying late at work, he saw on the monitor how Emily was taking leftovers of food that customers had not finished. He watched as she put them into containers and left with them. Outraged by her audacity, Steve immediately summoned the chef and pointed to the video. "What the hell is this, Mike?" the owner asked, clearly upset. "I gave you the raise you requested, and this is how you repay me? By letting a thief in a dishwasher's robe steal from me? Why is this woman taking food out of the kitchen so easily? Did you let her?" The chef turned pale, not expecting the owner to be so angry over some food. "Well, Mr. Brooks," Mike began hesitantly, "we got paid for that food. These leftovers were going to be thrown away in the morning. At least now she'll be able to feed her dog." Then Mike seemed to have an epiphany and quickly added, "You know what? I don't know. Emily is almost always the last one to leave, so I don't know. We should check on her." The chef fell silent, hoping his words would appease the owner. Mr. Brooks let Mike go and began to ponder. The only way to stop the increasing thefts was for him to confront the dishwasher and shame her personally if need be. He would even threaten her with firing. Determined to get to the bottom of things, the businessman located Emily's home address, got into his car and headed straight to her house. On the way, he spent a long time rehearsing a speech in which he would criticize the woman for her petty theft. He pictured himself saying, "What were you doing there, young lady? How can you so easily take and steal food from the restaurant kitchen? Sure, maybe it's leftovers for which the full bill has already been paid, but how can you feed raw food to a dog? I understand that some waste is tolerable, but these ingredients are expensive. The economy is in crisis right now, food prices are exorbitant, and what you're doing is equivalent to stealing money from the company." Mr. Brooks was approaching the house, not realizing he had driven to the city's outskirts, one of the poorest and most run-down neighborhoods. As he climbed the worn-down stairs, Mr. Brooks hesitantly rang the doorbell. A second later, Emily herself answered the door. She quickly silenced her barking dog and looked surprised at her unexpected late-night guest. "Good evening," Mr. Brooks began briskly. "Are you Emily, if I'm not mistaken?" Emily continued to look at him with a confused expression. Finally, the bewildered woman replied, "Yes, it's me, but who are you?" "Forgive me for asking." Emily had not yet met the restaurant's new owner and didn't know what he looked like. "Oh, I apologize for coming at this hour. I'm the new owner of the King's Crown. I have an earnest conversation to have with you. May I come in?" The dog continued to bark as Emily struggled to calm the animal before letting the businessman inside. Once he was inside, Mr. Brooks immediately noticed the problematic conditions the family was living under. The hallway had sagging wallpaper and an old electric floor lamp instead of a chandelier. Without meaning to, Mr. Brooks looked past Emily and saw a small, square kitchen where the signs of poverty were evident. A worn-out table, mismatched chairs, and scant food. Emily, sensing his scrutiny, felt a pang of shame but held her ground. "Please, come in," she said softly, leading him to the living room. The room was modest, with faded furniture and toys scattered on the floor. Her twin sons, Ethan and Harper, peeked curiously behind a curtain. Mr. Brooks cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. His rehearsed speech seemed harsh and out of place now. "Mrs. Ritchie," he began, trying to soften his tone, "I came here because I noticed you taking leftovers from the restaurant. I need to understand why." Emily's eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Mr. Brooks, I only take what would be thrown away. My children, they need food. I wouldn't steal, I can't bear to see delicious food waste when my boys are hungry." Mr. Brooks felt a lump in his throat. The reality of Emily's situation was stark and heartbreaking. He had come to accuse and reprimand, but now he saw a woman fighting desperately to provide for her family. "Emily," he said, his voice gentler, "I didn't realize. I didn't understand. I'm sorry for judging you so harshly. We can figure something out, a way for you to get the help you need without feeling like you have to hide." Emily looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," she whispered, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. As Mr. Brooks left that night, he resolved to make changes at the King's Crown, not just for Emily, but to create a more compassionate and understanding environment for all his employees. He had learned a valuable lesson in empathy and the importance of looking beyond appearances to understand people's struggles. To his great surprise, Mr. Brooks saw two twin boys happily eating the very leftovers from the restaurant. Mr. Brooks stammered, surprised. "You have children?" "Yes, as you can see," Emily answered calmly. Mr. Brooks went pale. "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I came here to reprimand you. I thought you were stealing food from the kitchen and feeding it to your dog. I'm sorry, I had no idea you had children." "Yes, those were for my children," Emily said with a bittersweet smile. "Our guests hardly touched these dishes, and at the end of the shift, Mike or I still had to dispose of them. Please understand that I would never have done this if it were dishes intended for the customers. But after all, the customers themselves refused them after paying for them. In terms of money, the restaurant doesn't suffer any losses." Mr. Brooks felt highly embarrassed. "Oh no, don't worry. It's all good, it's all good. You know what, let's do it this way. Let me go, and I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Again, I'm sorry for bothering you this late." Yeah, take care, guys. He apologized humbly and left Emily's apartment quietly. The following day, Mr. Brooks decided to do something he had never done before. He woke up early and was in a great mood, excited about work since the restaurant was something he enjoyed growing. He wore his best outfit, as he was accustomed to doing whenever he was in a good mood. As he arrived at the restaurant, he immediately headed for the kitchen. Everybody was busy with their tasks. Mike quickly gave orders to other workers to prepare salads and sauces. Grace, one of the oldest waitresses, greeted Mr. Brooks with her broad smile. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Would you like a hot chocolate as usual?" she asked. "No, I'm good today. I'll take wine, but later," he replied. "You look special today," Grace said. "Thanks, I feel special." Mr. Brooks typically held a briefing every morning with all the staff, but today, he headed straight to the kitchen. As Emily was dealing with another pile of dishes, Mr. Brooks asked her to come to his office. Emily's heart dropped. She didn't know what would happen. She made eye contact with Grace, who just smiled back at her. "Don't worry, I don't think he will. He's firing you. I'll tell you more, he seems different today." Emily knocked on Stephen's office door and asked if she could come in. There was a loud sound inside his office, and then Mr. Brooks's voice invited her in. "Come in, Emily." As she entered, she noticed Mr. Brooks looking less stern and more thoughtful than usual. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair before his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened last night. I've been thinking a lot about it." Emily sat down, her nerves tingling. "Yes, Mr. Brooks?" He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. I jumped to conclusions without understanding your situation. I now realize that what you did was out of necessity and not malice. Your children need food, and you did what any parent would do." Emily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you for understanding, Mr. Brooks. I would never intentionally harm the restaurant." "I know," he said softly. "And I want to help. Starting today, any safe leftovers can be packaged and taken home by the staff who need them. It's a small gesture, but I hope it makes a difference." Emily couldn't believe her ears. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. You have no idea what this means to me and my boys." "You're welcome," he replied with a genuine smile. "And one more thing. I've arranged for a small raise for you. It's not much, but it's a start. I want to ensure you and your family are cared for." Emily was overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Brooks. You already have by showing me what matters," he said. "Now, let's get back to work. We've got a restaurant to run." Emily left his office with a lighter heart, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long while. She knew that while challenges were still ahead, she wasn't facing them alone anymore. Stephen greeted Emily warmly as he jumped up from his desk and ran to the door. "Hi, yes, Emily, please come in. Take a seat. How are you today?" "Can't complain. Got a pile of dishes I gotta do," Emily replied with a hint of a smile. "Of course. Hey, listen, once again, I apologize for last night." "Don't worry, it's all right. Thank you for letting me take the leftovers. It's helping me a lot." "Oh man, you shouldn't take the leftovers anymore, Emily. You know what? I'll take care of the food for your kids, alright?" "Oh, Mr. Brooks, you don't have to. Emily, please call me Stephen. And please take this," he said, handing her an envelope with cash. "Is this my salary? It's tooth and online at the beginning of the month." "No, Yudhitsis for doing so many dishes." Emily knew she needed the money, but she felt so embarrassed. She asked Stephen if there was more work she could do in the restaurant to pay him back, to which Stephen replied, "There is something you can do for me. Do you think you and the twins can accompany me on a trip somewhere?" Long story short, she came out of Stephen's seeming with light. Grace noticed and smiled gently. From then on, Stephen tried to help her all the time. Eventually, the dishwasher and the restaurant owner developed more serious feelings for each other. Although Emily knew that Stephen could never replace her children, she still considered him a kind and loving person for her and her kids. Meanwhile, Stephen was still trying to reduce his restaurant's financial losses. Finally, the true culprit behind the theft of valuable goods was discovered, It was Chef Mike. Before working at the King's Creaking Psych, he had been an excellent chef but had some problems with local gangsters. He had previously worked as a chef for a gang leader, where he made friends and started dealing drugs on the side. Unfortunately, he soon accumulated a significant debt with drug dealers and was unable to pay them back. They punished him for finding products and cooking at the gang leader's leadership, and he repaid his debt. Consequently, he began stealing high-end items from the kitchen. Mike was caught on camera taking expensive fish from the fridge. Expecting to be fired immediately, Mike was called to Stevens for a talk. Why didn't me? Steven, Egan. I'm sorry, I'm Steve. I'm sorry I'm going to say something, but I was desperate. These guys, they were threatening to hurt my family. Why didn't the police, man? These are serious matters. You can't fix things by stealing. Mike was one of the best chefs in town before Steven became successful in the city. When Steven started his journey with a food cart, Mike was the first employee he hired. Mike loved his job and often went the extra mile to help Steven. When Steven decided to move to the city, they lost touch for a while. Mike, you're one of the best I've known since we were young. I want to trust you, alright? Yes, Steve, don't get me wrong. I'm not making Millam here, but I will give you another chance. You've been to me and helped me a lot when I was starting. I will never forget that. But please be honest with me. Okay, sure, Steve. Thank you so much. How much? What's our debt? What's 20 grand? It's right. Consider, I covered. I'm going to talk to them. Steven didn't want to fire partly because if Mike hadn't been stealing wouldn't have learned and wouldn't have been able to. Now, he seriously considered proposing to Emily and adopting Ethan and Harper. He had asked Emily to move into his place with the boys, and they all now lived together in a large, spacious apartment. Steven's heart was healed, as he had divorced his wife 6 months ago after she cheated on him with his business partner. After some time, Steven was ready for a serious, genuine relationship. He decided to choose Emily's pure and honest love. The story of Emily, Steven, and Mike is a vivid example of the power of resilience, compassion, and forgiveness. It tells the tale of 3 individuals facing different circumstances, each dealing with challenges and hardships. Emily is the embodiment of a determined single mother, striving tirelessly for the well-being of her children. Her sacrifices to ensure Ethan and Harper don't go hungry, even though she does, highlight the unconditional love of a mother. While questioning Emily in a different context, Emily's actions become understandable and sympathetic when considering her dire situation. Steven starts as a strict restaurant owner but gradually discovers the truth about his employees. His transformation from a stern boss to a friend and benefactor for Emily and her family underscores the importance of understanding others' situations and others' judgment. Steven's decisions impact Steven Siley's life and fill the void Emily's heart left by his broken marriage, giving him a new family. Mike is a more complex character, with a past and circumstances that forced him into making poor decisions. However, Steven's forgiveness and second chance Steven's Mike to redeem himself, reinforcing his loyalty and dedication to his job and friends. My perspective on this story is that it highlights the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and understanding in building a solid and supportive community. Each character has struggles and mistakes, but empathy and mutual assistance help them overcome these challenges. It is often easy to judge others without fully understanding their circumstances. This story reminds us that sometimes, with empathy and kindness, we can make a significant difference in someone else's life. For those going through tough times, the story of Emily, Steven, and Mike inspires them not to give up and to believe that people are willing to help them overcome their difficulties.